Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Seven Eighths, a podcast to share stories on failures and rejections. There are no fairy tale endings in this podcast. My fellow conversationalists aren't past the mountain of struggle. In fact, some of them might still be in it. I hope this podcast serves as a forum for friends and acquaintances to exchange tales of defeat. Defeats that make the 7/8 part of our lives, like the part of the iceberg you can't see. By sharing these stories, I hope we can all normalize failures and thereby win over that fear of defeat. Because failing is just a part of living. I hope you will listen and relate. Do leave me a note of feedback and critique. I am on Twitter @FarmNectar. Now to our episode.
Welcome to Episode 6 of The7/8ths. For this episode, I invited Gayatri Kamath Kini, an accessibility champion and a passionate diversity and inclusion leader. In a career spanning over 20 years, Gayatri has launched world-class products and implemented global programs to promote inclusion and equity in workplace. But success visible to the naked eye didn't come easy to Gayatri. Gayatri talks about her work struggles and her most painful personal setback. She is raw, vulnerable, and unapologetic. The conversation was heavy and eye-opening. Just listen in.
What is your view of failures? How did you perceive failures when you were going through them? And has your view changed?
Well, before we go into that, I want to congratulate you on taking this step. Everybody has ideas, and very few of us can actually take an idea and bring it to life using your voice and creating a platform for people to be able to have a conversation about failures. When you told me why you're doing this, you said, I have 2 kids and I want them to view failures differently. I want them to view failing as part of life. I want them to view, not be afraid to fail. And honestly, that hit hard. I want to applaud you for doing this. I'm super excited to be a part of this. Thank you for inviting me. So let me go back to your question, is what is my perspective on failure? And I've been remembering a lot of things from my school days. I think it was a science or a math class. It was a new lesson. It wasn't something that we had talked about before. And
the teacher asked a question in the class, and there was just pin drop silence. And she nudged the class to, give it a shot, because she wanted us to attempt answering the question. And, nobody in the class raised the hand. And I just was, I'm going to give it a shot. And I could be wrong. And I stood up and I told her what I thought the answer was. And my teacher smiled and she said, Gayatri, your answer is wrong. The entire class erupted in laughter. But she, praised me for giving it a try. You were the only person who raised your hand and you gave it a shot. And for that, kudos to you. Mm-hmm. But my class laughed at me. Mm-hmm. And my memory is the shame I felt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though my teacher encouraged me, the takeaway from that day was my whole class laughed at me today. The acceptance of my peers was a lot more valuable to me than the kudos I got from my teacher. And I think the message was completely lost. I only recognized that quality many, many years later. And now I'm talking to you and I'm reflecting on this incident.
Yeah.
And at the time, it felt like I had failed. I had failed miserably because I didn't have the right answer. So a lot of the failures, I think, in general, have to do with also the expectations, right? Whether you set it for yourself, or others set it for you.
Yeah.
I think that is a trap that we all fall into.
Absolutely.
Where we tend to set the bar really high. For ourselves, and we allow others to set the bar very high. Another thing about failure also that's important is that what may seem as a failure in that moment could be a blessing in disguise. There is this mindset that failing at something or being rejected, or having to experience setbacks in life, and we've all had setbacks, somehow feels like, in the moment, feels like it's a bad thing. And our defense mechanisms kick up and we start, fighting it.
Flight.
But now I feel the approach to failure is a little bit different, where I feel like I know it's, when the setback happens, you first instinct is to pull up your fists and start fighting. And now I think it's a little bit more, well, let me give it a few minutes. Let me think about this some more. Is it really a setback? Those are the things that happen now. But in the formative years, I remember just kind of kicking off my gloves.
What's interesting with what you just said is you're suggesting that we marinate the failure a little bit. Like just let it sit. Let it sit.
Let it in. Let it in. I mean, let it in. I think the pain comes from fighting it. The pain is from that, you put your fist up and you start fighting, when failure is not there to necessarily, come at you with a vengeance, and it's not there because it wants to fight you. I think it's there because it's wanting to teach you something.
Oh, wow.
And
that's actually a very interesting perspective. That is true. I want to hear your story around about failures that were painful for you, because where you are today and your perception, your attitude towards failures was something that was formed over the years, and your painful experiences being a big part of forming that opinion, right? Forming that view. Would you share one or two failures that you saw?
There are many, Amrita, and they mostly have to do with people. They mostly have to do with some of the most painful, most intimate of experiences in life. And I'll share one with you that I think is painful, in just so many ways. And in fact, it's this week, if I'm not mistaken, yesterday or day before yesterday was the 7th anniversary of that pain. And literally, it's physical, emotional pain. In 2012, my mother was diagnosed with cancer in around Thanksgiving. They were scheduled to be in the US with us for Thanksgiving, but my mother called me, I think somewhere around Halloween, to say, we're not going to make it. I'm sorry, but I think I'm going to have surgery. They think that I have thyroid cancer and we have to get it removed, and so on. That was 2012 November. Exactly a year later, of course, because of that and the fact that, cancer is, thyroid stuff is genetic, I was on the watch list. And my care team here was keeping an eye on me. And I knew this was kind of my destiny, down the line. I didn't expect it to happen so quickly. But within a year, it was the same diagnosis. And my cancer at my age was progressing much faster than my mom. My mom was diagnosed in her late 50s. At that point, she was, already, at a point where, she didn't really need her thyroid. But for me, hearing the cancer diagnosis was a personal failure to a whole nother level, because I was diagnosed literally I want to say on my 35th birthday. And I felt like my body had failed me. Up until that point, I was fit. I was taking care of myself. I was super mom. I could do everything. I was pitching in at school. I had this high-powered job that I was working 80 hours a week. I was breastfeeding while on conference calls. I was taking care of my parents. I left my 6-month-old child to go care for my mother when she was going through her cancer treatment. I was invincible. You could not break me. And the biggest failure came in the form of my own health failing me. And to me, that was just painful. I just hit I just hit rock bottom, I thought, but I was wrong. I just was, kind of scraping the surface of what I describe as a fall into one of those deep, like black holes that have no end. I just kind of was
Bottomless.
starting that journey. Yeah, it
Bottomless
was just
pit.
going bottomless. It wasn't even a pit. It was just this big black hole that I was falling into. I didn't know at the time, but I remember that that's where it started, and I felt that it was a big failure on my part. But I continued to persist and, do all the things that I was doing at that time, continue to work through surgery and cancer treatment. I launched my first product as a product manager while I was in cancer treatment. I kept going, and then a few years later it caught up with me again, and I just kind of spiraled into additional health issues and just kept on spiraling till about 2017 when I felt like I had hit the ground. But I think the reason why I call that as the most painful experience is because I feel like I had failed myself. I failed to listen to my body and what it was telling me. I failed to recognize that I was my own enemy by holding myself to these really high standards of being super mom and being brave, of not taking the time off to, just take care of myself, of saying, I'm ill, I'm a sick person. I need to take some time off. Like, I didn't want to be that. I wanted to be brave for my kids. I wanted to be brave to the world. I wanted to be invincible. And I think I did myself a huge disservice by doing that. I had failed myself. And to me, to this day, I'm still crawling back up from that, that black hole. I'm just like, climbing up that cliff. And some days I am up, and some days I, come, falling back down. But I recognize that I need to spend the time to do that. I recognize that I need to do this for myself. And I made some really tough decisions, right? That initially I felt I struggled with. Like, one of the biggest decisions was, scaling back from my professional life and saying, you know what, I'm going to define my own rules of engagement. I'm a smart, talented person. I am very hardworking and sincere. And I have very specific skills. And one of the biggest abilities I have is I can learn anything. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to take a step back from working full time, which, honestly was killing me. Mm-hmm. Because of the expectations and the fact that you can never turn it off in your head. I couldn't. And I started consulting, and I think that really opened my eyes up to other opportunities. And that's how I stumbled onto accessibility, and how it connected me back to the work I was doing at my special school, which also was an accidental, opportunity. I was not planning on doing it. It just accidentally happened. I wasn't planning on consulting. It just accidentally happened. And so I got connected back to what I think intrinsically felt like a purposeful, kind of purpose-driven work.
Yeah.
So failure kind of, when you embrace it, it just rewards you, I think. And I have to tell you multiple times, I continue, even today, I continue to feel like a failure, because if I had stuck to a full-time job, I probably would have had a big title. I would have made tons of money, have stock options and things like that. The question was, what is my most painful failure? I think the most painful failure was failing to take care of myself. I think was my biggest, to this day, biggest failure.
Yeah. I mean, for what it's worth, I'll say this. I mean, I see your updates on Facebook, and, I see your updates on LinkedIn. I think there was a presentation that you made when you were at Intuit. Am I right?
With Brad, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
I was presenting one of my ideas, like I was working on a white space idea or something. Yeah.
Yeah, so I remember that distinctly, and I was sharing that too with my husband. I said, "Well, I remember I told you this girl. She's doing really well for herself." Only for me, as you were talking, only for me to just reflect on it and go, "Oh my God, she was actually dealing with such a scary, almost soul-crushing health issue while doing her full-time job and
Yeah.
being a mom." And yeah, thank you for sharing that. I frankly had no idea that you were. I was tearing up almost as you were talking through it. I had no idea that you were dealing with so much of pain. Just hearing you describe it, I can fathom how difficult it would have been. Thank you for sharing that.
And for your listeners, man, woman, child, it doesn't matter. And this is something I tell my children is make yourself the most important priority in life, because if you are well, physically, mentally, then you can show up in the most incredible ways at work, in society, for your family. But if you are not well, then everything around you crumbles. And I don't know why such a simple idea is so hard to grasp for so many people. I had to learn it the hard way. I had to learn. Life taught me in the hardest lesson, in the form of the toughest failure, and it to be and I'm still struggling with health issues. I still am crawling back up that wall, and some days are harder than others. I'm not here to tell you that it's all great and it's all behind me. No, absolutely not. It's a struggle every single day, and it's some days it's a blur, other days it's you're very clear in what you want to do. So I think I know this is a little bit of a tangential conversation to talking about failures, because somehow when we talk about failures, we tend to talk about failures in the context of our careers, or failures in the context of relationships, and but what about failures, how we fail ourselves? How do we fail ourselves? By setting these unrealistic expectations, by signing up to a formula that you are told you should follow. And I'll tell you, here's where I am. I'm turning 43 in 2 weeks. I will tell you that the big realization for me is that I've lived, let's just take the first decade out because it doesn't count. Up till 10, you're just like breezing through life. But the 3 decades I've been on this planet, 3 decades have been following the rule book, right? Which is in your, from 10 to 20, you're basically, you have to meet certain milestones, right? When it comes to education,
check marks,
check marks, right? I mean, we all have that. Education, how you show up as a person, your personality, for me, by 21, I was married. And of course, in your 20s, you're basically, career focus, life focus, you're, going after that mortgage that you desperately want for the rest of your life, dealing with a new relationship, getting to know a guy you barely know, right? I mean, things like that, right? Marriage is hard. Working, early career professional, being an early career professional is hard.
Yeah.
And you did all that in your 20s. And 30s was all about children and child rearing, all about kids and difficult pregnancies and miscarriages and health issues and cancer treatment. Like, fuck. I mean, seriously, it's like, I'm 40, in my 40s, I've decided that the rules of engagement are going to change. 40s, 50s, 60s. I'm lucky if I'm going to make it to my 70s with my health issues. But gosh, the rules have got to change. And I'm making my own rules. And it's going to be different than the last 3 decades. I can tell you that much.
Yeah. and we start with this podcast. We just change the rules of failure. We just change the way we look at failure. One thing you said early on, which was kind of interesting for me, was
You talked, I mean, this was, during your childhood, the summers where you just wanted to do so many different things. And it didn't matter to you whether you were good at it or not. You just wanted to do it. Was that an element in coloring your perspective of failures? Almost, pushing you to raise your hand in a crowd of silent spectators. Did that play a role?
Let me ask you something. I will answer your question. But before we do that, do you remember as a child working on a painting or a drawing? Do you remember that feeling? Do you remember what it felt like to do that?
Yeah.
Did you care about what anybody thought about that painting or what colors you were using, or would you be able to sell it for a price? What would happen if your parents didn't put it up on the wall? Like, did you even care when you were drawing?
Yeah, you're right. No, it didn't matter.
But what was that feeling that you were?
Just pure joy. I wanted to do it, so I went and did it.
How did we forget what that feels like?
I know, right?
And that is I think your question, which is, when we are that child, we've all been that child who sits with a piece of paper and pen or color, paint, and you're creating just for the enjoyment of that process. You're not worried about the outcome. You're not like, I'm going to be the next Picasso. Like, no, you're just enjoying that process. And I've always been that person who really enjoys the process. And somewhere along the lines, I think I forgot in my 20s and 30s, and maybe even today, I think I sometimes fall into that trap of wanting to focus on outcomes. I'm not a very religious person, but I was raised in a very religious household. And my mother used to make us recite the shlokas from the Bhagavad Gita, which is in Sanskrit. The first paragraph in the Bhagavad Gita says, Karmanyavadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. What that means really is you have to keep on doing what you're doing without worrying too much about the outcome. But I only understood the meaning as an adult. That is very difficult to do because we are conditioned to set outcomes, right? We are conditioned to set goals and achieve those goals. We are expected to follow a certain formula. It's like, if you are not VP by this age, and if you don't own X number of houses, then you are a failure. Like, who said that?
Yeah.
Who decided that for you?
Yeah.
So and I'm not saying this is also, some people say, oh, wait, like, then you're basically navigating life without any goals. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you have goals in life. You absolutely have goals in life, but don't have the expectation that, that's where life, that's where it's going to end. Because I can tell you that in my life, none of my plans have worked out. Not a single one. Not a single one. Might as well enjoy the process. And,
Thank you. This conversation, this series of conversations is a step. I'm hoping will be a step in that direction. This was a very candid, honest, and at points very poignant conversation for me. Like I mentioned, I did not know that you were grappling with something as serious and as gut-wrenching, as life-changing, and you went through it with so much grit. You're here and you're being vulnerable and sharing your journey with us. Kudos to you, Gayatri. No, seriously, kudos to you. And thank you. Thank you for doing this.
I think I deserve any kudos for just being me. But I thank you for giving me the platform to share my stories. And hopefully this is helpful. Even if it's helpful to one person, I think we've accomplished something. And
I agree.
That's pretty awesome. And I want to thank you again for bringing your idea to life. looking forward to moving the needle on this. You're making failure look cool, and I think that should be like, there should be one page of accomplishments and one page of failures.
Yeah, why not, right? Yeah, thanks again.
Thank you, Amrita. This was great.
And that's how the cookie crumbles. Gayatri's story reminded me that life has its own plans. The best thing to do is just let it on in. Accept the defeat, as it isn't here to avenge, but rather to give an opportunity to learn. She reminded me that failure can come from trying to follow a formula when there isn't one to follow. And she revealed the truth that the hardest of the failures is the failure to care for oneself. So, do care for yourself. You are the most important entity, as your well-being means the well-being of everyone around you. Thank you for listening to this episode. I do hope you enjoyed it. Share your thoughts. I am on Twitter @FamNectar. Until the next conversation. Cheers, guys.